We seem to learn most of our theology about the cross from the evangelistic sermons recorded in Acts and the writings of Paul and others in the New Testament. Jesus is not recorded as teaching very much about the meaning of the cross. Jesus predicted his rejection, suffering, death, and resurrection 3 times in Mark's Gospel. But apart from Jesus' one comment in Mark 10:45, the Son of Man came as a ransom for many, Jesus did not teach extensively on the meaning of the cross. But in Mark's Gospel, after Jesus is arrested, Jesus stops teaching, but Mark continues teaching us in his characteristic parables, using real-life characters and actions to emphasize spiritual meaning at multiple levels. He introduces 2 named characters who are the human face of the implications of the cross. I'm going to be reading from Mark 15, verses 6 through 15. Now at the festival, he used to release a prisoner for them, anyone for whom they asked. Now a man called Barabbas was in prison with the rebels who had committed murder during the insurrection. So the crowd came and began to ask Pilate to do for them according to his custom. Then he answered them, "Do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews?" For he realized that it was out of jealousy that the chief priests had handed him over. The chief priests stirred up the crowd to have him release Barabbas for them instead. Pilate spoke to them again. "Then what do you wish me to do with the man you call the king of the Jews?" They shouted back, "Crucify him!" Pilate asked them, "Why? What evil has he done?" They shouted all the more, "Crucify him!" So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released Barabbas for them, and after flogging Jesus, he handed him over to be crucified. Then in Mark 15, verses 20 to 22. Then they led him out to crucify him. They compelled a passerby, who was coming in from the country, to carry his cross. It was Simon of Cyrene, the father of Alexander and Rufus. Then they brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. Ironically, the chief priests, scribes, and the crowd at Pilate's audience clamor for him to release Barabbas. Barabbas is the kind of man they are portraying Jesus to be, one who has rejected the authority of Rome and made a challenge to Caesar. But Pilate knows that if Jesus were such a man, they'd be clamoring for him to be released, because they hate the authority of Rome. Barabbas is one such man, and until a few hours previously, the 3rd cross being prepared for the condemned man had his name on it. But in a moment of unexpected grace, Barabbas is set free while Jesus goes to his cross. Lucky Barabbas! Barabbas has a significance beyond his own story of freedom. Having the name Barabbas is unusual for Mark. He rarely gives non-followers names, and usually only when they are historically significant, like Pilate, Herod, or Herodias. For example, Mark doesn't tell us the names of the thieves on either side of Jesus, nor of the guards, nor even of the many scribes and Pharisees who objected to Jesus' ministry and ultimately clamored for his death. Furthermore, the name Barabbas is the only untranslated Aramaic in Mark's Gospel, but Mark has given us the pieces of Barabbas' name to work it out for ourselves. In Mark 10:46, we learn that Bar means son of, and in Mark 14:36, in Jesus' garden prayer, we learn that Abba means father. Barabbas was a rebel, a son of a father, which is about as generic a boy's name as you can get. We are all rebels, children of our parents. Barabbas is Joe Everyman, and his cross was ours. Jesus, the only true Son of the Heavenly Father, took our place upon that cross. As he said, Mark 10:45, he came to give his life as a ransom for many. Then Mark introduces another new named character in the story, Simon of Cyrene. Cyrene was in North Africa, essentially Libya today, and Simon was probably dark-skinned, a likely target for the Roman oppressive coercion this story depicts. Usually, if you want to name someone, you might say, as Mark does, Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus. It was rarely done to identify someone by their children unless the children would be known to the people you were writing to. Indeed, I assume that Simon of Cyrene became a believer, and his now adult children are known to the people of Rome, where Mark is first putting his gospel on paper. And Paul mentions a Rufus living in Rome, in Romans 16:13, when he writes his letter to the church before he arrives in Rome a few years later. So the most logical explanation of this is that Simon of Cyrene, a random passerby at the time of Jesus' death, became taken up by the story that pressed itself upon him. He followed up with it, joined the believers in Jerusalem, and eventually his children were believers in Rome. What the Roman soldiers did to Simon was oppressive, but it likely became the biggest blessing of his life, mirroring in a small way the cross of Christ itself. Jesus, in Mark 8:34, said to his disciples, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me." Simon of Cyrene was the first person to take up Jesus' cross when he could no longer carry it and follow Jesus to his death. This would very likely have had a profound impact on Simon. He then is a model for us who follow Jesus, saying yes to suffering and the cross we each must bear, and saying yes to Jesus' call to follow him to our death, whatever death comes. Jesus' death, not ours, is the ransom. Our suffering or death cannot save anyone. But Jesus does promise that as we follow him, saying yes to suffering in his name, our death can be, like his, redemptive. Our suffering can be meaningful, purposeful, healing, and redemptive in our own lives and the lives of many others. By the power of Jesus' cross, our suffering too has power and meaning. The summary of these two images we see in Barabbas the ransom, the rebel who was set free by the power of Jesus' death. Jesus' gruesome death pays the penalty that we, as rebellious sinners, each deserve. He died on our cross. And then we see the model in Simon of Cyrene, the disciple, who takes up his cross and follows Jesus. Jesus shows us the way to embrace redemptive suffering, the way of the cross. So Jesus' death is a ransom. Jesus faced a grim and painful death on a cross marked out for us. He died for us. Yet also Jesus' death is a model. We are called to follow him and embrace redemptive suffering in his name. These remarks are taken from sketch number 109 and are available in written form at the link provided in the description. Thank you for taking a few minutes to watch this. I hope it's helpful to you. And if you did, I appreciate it if you would like this video and subscribe to my channel and let other people know that might benefit from these videos. Really is helpful to me.